Once they decide you're incompetent, Ruth, no one will ever believe a thing you say again. What my daughter-in-law whispered in that courtroom was pure family betrayal, the kind of calculated gaslighting meant to strip an older woman of her freedom in a legal battle she never asked for. Her breath warmed the side of my face like she was trying to soothe me, but the venom in her voice was cold enough to raise a chill under my skin. Paige had always been careful with her tone, light, sweet, endlessly polite, but not today. Today she thought she had already won. She leaned back with a slow smile, smoothing her blazer with the confidence of a woman who believed the world was finally bending to her will. "You really should have signed those papers," she added softly, her lips barely moving. "This didn't have to be so humiliating for you." I didn't reply. I didn't trust my voice not to crack under the weight of everything I'd swallowed since she came into our family. But silence didn't mean surrender. It meant I knew what was coming next. The judge cleared his throat. "Mrs. Lawson, Mrs. Marlowe, please return to your seats." Paige straightened, turning her face toward the bench, like a dutiful granddaughter. She had perfected that expression over the last year. Earnest, concerned, beautifully aggrieved. The kind of look that makes people believe you, even before you speak. She'd used that same face on my son Daniel, and he had believed every word. I settled into my chair, the wood cool beneath my palms. The courtroom lights were too bright, too white, revealing the paleness creeping over Paige's skin. She wasn't nervous. Not yet. She was basking. But then the judge spoke the words she never expected. "We'll begin with the video evidence submitted by the respondent." A tiny wrinkle formed between Paige's eyebrows. "Video?" she repeated. "Your Honor, I don't know what she's talking about." My attorney stayed silent. He knew silence was more powerful than any argument we could make. The bailiff rolled the screen forward. A soft hum filled the room as the monitor flickered to life. For a moment, all that appeared was a still image of my living room. Beige walls, the couch where Daniel used to fall asleep with homework on his chest, the chipped ceramic dish where I kept my keys. Ordinary, peaceful, mine. Paige shifted. I heard her swallow. The judge nodded to the clerk. "Play it." The footage began. There was Paige, stepping into my home on a Tuesday morning she had sworn under oath she had never visited. She closed the door behind her with a careful click, then walked straight to the coffee table. Her movements were efficient, almost clinical. She opened my pill organizer. She tipped the morning pills into her palm. She slipped them into her pocket with the ease of someone who had practiced the motion many times. Then she took out a small, unmarked bottle from her purse and shook out different pills, gray ones, chalky-looking, and placed them into the Monday slot. The nurse in the back row gasped. I didn't have to look to know who it was. She had smiled kindly at me earlier, before the hearing began, the way nurses often smile at older women who are trying to seem strong. The video continued. Paige moved the pill organizer 2 inches to the left. She adjusted the coaster, shifted the remote. Little things. Things she later insisted I had misplaced. The judge's eyebrows rose a fraction. Paige's face went rigid. But the footage wasn't done. The screen jumped to another day. Another visit she denied ever making. Another quiet sabotage. This time she knelt by my sofa and pushed my keys deep under the cushions. The camera caught her whispering to herself, "She'll never remember looking here." Someone behind me muttered, "My God." Paige stood abruptly. "This is edited," she yelled. She hired someone to. This is fake." The judge held up one hand. "Mrs. Lawson, sit." Her voice cracked. "Your Honor, she's confused. She's been having episodes. Sit," he repeated. For the first time since I'd known her, Paige obeyed without arguing. She sank into her seat like the air had been sucked out of her. Daniel sat perfectly still beside her. His hands were white-knuckled around the edge of the table. His jaw clenched. His eyes darted between the screen and Paige, as if he were watching the collapse of something he'd spent months trying to believe in. The next clip began. Paige entered my house with a folder this time. She pulled out an official-looking document, her petition to have me declared incompetent. She placed it on my kitchen counter and practiced her testimony aloud. She forgets things. She leaves the stove on. She's not safe to manage her money anymore. Her voice was calm, measured, convincing. But when she glanced around as if expecting applause from an imaginary audience, her face turned directly toward the hidden camera. Her eyes flicked to her reflection in the microwave, and she smoothed her hair, checking that she looked composed enough to deceive a judge. My attorney pressed pause. The judge leaned back. His silence spoke louder than any verdict could. Paige's breathing grew loud and uneven behind me. Daniel's breath hitched in his throat. And I sat still, hands folded in my lap, the quietest person in the room. The judge looked at us, first me, then Paige. "Mrs. Lawson," he said, "this evidence is overwhelming." Paige's mouth fell open. No, she's manipulating you. She's old. She doesn't know how to record something like this. She didn't, my attorney said. Her friend installed the camera after Mrs. Marlowe reported items missing. The judge turned to Paige. "This court finds no evidence of incompetence on the part of Mrs. Marlowe. Instead, we find extensive evidence of deliberate manipulation, fraud, and emotional harm committed by the petitioner." The words hung in the air like the dust motes floating in the sunlit window beside the bailiff. Slow, inevitable, unavoidable. Paige pushed away from the table. "You don't understand. She's lying. Her voice broke. Not into tears, into something raw. The moment she realized the walls she built were closing in on her. Not me. The judge gave one final nod. "The petition is dismissed. With prejudice." There it was. The moment her empire of lies split in two. Chairs scraped back as the room rose. I stood slowly, smoothing my jacket. My legs felt steady, grounded, as though the truth had rooted me deeper into the floor. Paige reached for my arm as I stepped past her. Her fingers trembled. Her nails dug lightly into my sleeve. "You can't do this to me," she whispered, shaking now. I met her eyes, calm, centered. "I didn't do this," I said softly. "You did." Daniel finally looked at me then. Really looked. His face was pale, his mouth tight, guilt swimming behind his eyes. I saw a boy in a grown man's skin, realizing he'd handed the keys of his judgment to someone who had no right to hold them. "Mom," he breathed. Just one word. Weak. Lost. I wasn't ready to answer. Not yet. I stepped out into the hallway. The courthouse light fell over me, warm and honest, untouched by anyone's manipulation. And somewhere behind me I heard the first crack in Paige's perfect composure. "But to understand the path that led us here, to this moment, this fight, this quiet victory, I need to take you back to the beginning, to the day she first smiled at me, to the moment she said she wanted to help, to the first small lie she planted like a seed in my home. Because that was the day everything started to change. And she had no idea what was coming. By the time your life is put on trial, no one asks what it looked like on an ordinary Tuesday. No one in that courtroom asked about my mornings before Paige decided I was slipping. They didn't ask about the way the kettle whistled at exactly 7:10, or the way the sunlight came through the kitchen window and landed on the same cracked tile by the sink. They didn't ask about the crossword puzzles or the way I still remembered every neighbor's birthday without checking a calendar. They asked if I repeated myself. They asked if I ever forgot where I put my keys. They asked if I ever burned a pot on the stove. As if that was all a life could be reduced to. The truth is, before Paige began helping me, my life was small and steady, but it was mine. I woke up early, even after retirement. Old habits stick. 35 years as a high school English teacher will do that to a woman. My alarm was more for comfort than function. I was usually awake before it rang, listening to the quiet hum of the house settle around me like an old blanket. I made tea, not coffee. Earl Grey, 1 sugar. Toast with too much butter, because by 63 I had outlived every diet I'd ever tried. I did my crossword in pen. People think that's arrogance. It isn't. It's just that you learn over time that mistakes can be crossed out. The first time Paige came to my house alone, I was planting tomatoes. I remember the day clearly. Early spring. The air still cold enough to sting my fingers when I dug into the soil. The sky was one of those washed-out blues that promises more warmth than it gives. I heard her car door before I saw her. A soft thud, followed by quick, efficient footsteps on the walkway. "Ruth?" she called. "Hi, it's Paige." I straightened slowly, my knees complaining louder than I did. "Back here," I answered, brushing dirt from my gloves. "In the garden." Her head appeared around the corner of the house, hair perfectly styled. Not a strand out of place despite the breeze. Paige always looked curated, as if she knew there was an invisible camera on her at all times. "Oh my gosh," she said, smiling wide. "You're actually doing this yourself?" I looked at the small row of raised beds. "They're just tomatoes," I said. "They don't bite." She laughed, but there was something tight at the edges of it. "Well, I brought lunch," she said, holding up a takeout bag. "I thought maybe we could talk. Daniel's at a meeting, but he told me you've been working out here a lot. I didn't want you to overdo it." Overdo it. The word tickled something in the back of my mind. I ignored it. "I'm fine," I said, "but lunch sounds nice. Thank you." We ate at the patio table. She talked about work, something in corporate compliance, a field that seemed to involve an impressive amount of email and very little paper. She told me about a big client she was courting, how she was known in her industry as Paige Lawson, the one who fixes messes. "You kept your last name, didn't you?" I asked, dipping a piece of bread into my soup. I already knew the answer, but I wanted to hear how she framed it. She nodded. "Lawson has recognition in my field," she said. "I've worked hard for that. Changing it would have been confusing. Bad for branding." Branding. She said it like she was a product. "At first, Daniel was a little weird about it," she added. "But he understands. It's just a name, just a name." I smiled politely and changed the subject. It wasn't a crime, keeping her own name. It wasn't a red flag on its own. Plenty of women did. But looking back, I see the shape of it. The distance she liked to keep. 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Part of the family, but never completely. It would take me a long time to understand how much that mattered. That first lunch, though, was pleasant. She asked how I was feeling, how I was sleeping, whether I ever felt foggy or off. She couched the questions in concern, wrapping each one in a soft little blanket of, "I just want you to be okay." "I'm adjusting," I told her. "Retirement is quiet. I miss my students, but I'm all right." "You know you can always call us," she said. "We're just 20 minutes away. You're not alone." The way she said alone made it sound like a problem. After lunch, she insisted on clearing the plates herself. I watched from the patio as she carried them inside. She moved through my kitchen with the easy familiarity of someone who had decided it belonged to her too. I told myself that was a good thing. That's what mothers are supposed to want, isn't it? For their children to marry someone who treats their home like a second home. For their family to grow, not shrink. It was a week later when the first forgetting happened. I was meeting my friend Marianne for coffee. We'd known each other since our teacher training days. 2 young women in stiff blazers, wondering if we'd chosen the right profession. 50 years later, we still met every Thursday at the same cafe, ordered the same drinks, and complained about new things with old comfort. I went to grab my keys from the ceramic dish by the front door. They weren't there. The dish was empty. I frowned, picked it up, looked underneath, even though I knew that was ridiculous. No keys. I checked my purse, kitchen counters, the hook by the back door, even though I never used it. Nothing. My first thought wasn't, I'm losing my mind. My first thought was, I must have put them somewhere else. Everyone misplaces things. When you're younger, you laugh it off. When you're older, people start using phrases like senior moment and watching your reaction too closely, like they're waiting for you to crack. I found them 20 minutes later in the pocket of my gardening jacket, hanging in the hall closet. I hadn't worn that jacket in days. I shook my head, half annoyed, half amused with myself. I sent Marianne a text, told her I'd be a few minutes late. I did not mention the keys. Why would I? It was an oddity, not a story. I forgot about it. For a while. The second thing went missing the following week. My pill organizer. I kept it on the coffee table beside my crossword book. Same place every day. Morning and night, I would open the correct little lid, take the pills inside with a sip of water, and feel a small private satisfaction at having remembered. One evening, it wasn't there. I checked the table, the shelf underneath, the end table, the kitchen counter. Nothing. I turned in a slow circle in the center of the room, trying to picture myself that morning. Had I taken it into the bedroom? The bathroom? Had I set it down somewhere else? My heart beat faster. The faint familiar pressure gathered behind my eyes, the early warning of a headache. Calm down, I told myself. It's here somewhere. I found it on the kitchen counter, near the bread box. It shouldn't have been there. I never took it into the kitchen. The pills are for morning and night, not with meals. Still, I told myself I must have carried it with me without thinking. People do that. They move on autopilot. Not every mistake is a symptom. That night, though, as I lay in bed, Paige's words came back to me from that first lunch. Do you ever feel foggy? Do you ever feel off? I pushed the thoughts away. Sleep, at my age, is too precious to surrender to imagined problems. The next Sunday, Daniel and Paige came for dinner. Paige walked in carrying a casserole and a bouquet of flowers. "Hi, Mom," she said, kissing my cheek. "You look beautiful." "Doesn't she look beautiful, Daniel?" He smiled, a little sheepishly. "Yeah, Mom, you do. We ate. We talked." Or rather, Daniel and I tried to talk around the subjects Paige steered us toward. How often I drove, whether I'd thought about downsizing, whether managing bills ever felt overwhelming. "It's a lot on your own," she said, slicing her chicken neatly. "You don't have to pretend it's not." "I'm managing fine," I said. "Of course," she replied, with a smile that said she didn't believe me. "I just worry. We both do." Daniel nodded, eyes flicking away from mine. After dinner, while they were in the kitchen, I reached for my pill organizer on the coffee table. It wasn't there. A small, sharp prick of fear slid under my ribs. I stood and walked quietly to the kitchen doorway. They were talking in low voices. Paige's back was to me. "I'm telling you, she didn't remember where she put her keys last week," she was saying. "You said she told you that, right?" "I mean, yeah," Daniel answered. "But anyone can forget keys." "It's not just the keys," Paige insisted. "It's the pills, the mail, the way she repeats stories. You don't hear it because you're used to it. But I notice things." My hand tightened around the doorframe. Pills, mail, repeating stories. It was the first time I heard the pattern spoken out loud. I stepped back into the living room without saying a word, my heart beating a steady, heavy rhythm. There, on the kitchen counter behind me, next to the sink, was my pill organizer. I could see it reflected in the dark glass of the TV screen. I knew absolutely knew I hadn't put it there. For the first time, the thought slipped in, quiet as a draft under a door. What if this isn't about what I'm forgetting? What if it's about what someone else is moving? I turned the TV on, not to watch, but to give my hands something to do. My reflection vanished, replaced by a commercial. In the kitchen, their voices dropped even lower. I didn't interrupt. Not that night. That was the beginning. The first missing keys. The first misplaced pills. The first time my own home felt unfamiliar. Back then, I still thought I could fix it by being more careful. I had no idea I was standing at the edge of a plan someone else was already writing for me. The first real crack didn't come with shouting or accusations. It came in the quiet space between breaths, in that thin moment when you realize someone else has begun to rearrange the edges of your life without asking permission. I didn't see it at first, maybe I didn't want to. Even now, I can still feel the warm drift of sunlight across my kitchen floor that morning, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the simple calm of a day that hadn't yet revealed what it was turning into. I kept telling myself that nothing was wrong, that people misplace things, that retirement made the days softer around the edges, that the noise in my mind was just my own imagination. But imagination doesn't put your mail on the kitchen counter when you never brought it in. Imagination doesn't move your pill organizer across the house. Imagination doesn't place your crossword book in a spot you haven't touched in months. Someone was in my home, someone who knew exactly how to make it look like I had done it myself. But this chapter starts before I understood any of that. Before the panic, before the hidden camera, before the courtroom screen lit up with the truth. It begins on the first gentle Tuesday after the Sunday dinner, where Paige asked if I ever felt foggy. That morning I woke with a heavy feeling in my chest. Not the weight of fear, not yet, but something close to it. A pressure, a knowing. I pushed it aside, made my tea, buttered my toast. Earl Grey. Too much butter. Crossword and pen. Routine like a prayer. When I reached for the crossword book, it wasn't on my table. It was on the bookshelf across the room, tucked neatly between two cookbooks I hadn't opened since Daniel was in middle school. I stared at it for a moment, my fingers resting against the spine. It wasn't the kind of thing I would move, not without noticing. Maybe I did bring it over there, I told myself. Maybe I was distracted. Maybe. A word that tasted wrong. I forced the thought away, grabbed the book, and sat down. But I didn't fill out a single clue. The wrongness of it lingered like a shadow in the corner of the room. By afternoon, I had shaken it off enough to drive to the grocery store. The sun felt good on my shoulders. I parked in my usual spot and walked with confidence, trying to reclaim the version of myself I trusted. But when I rolled my cart back to the car, there she was, Paige Lawson, leaning against my driver's side door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hi," she said brightly. I was just in the area. My grocery store. 20 minutes from her house. 30 from her office. She moved toward me with outstretched arms, like I was someone who needed steadying. I hated the way it made me feel. "What brings you here?" I asked, forcing lightness into my voice. "Oh, thought I'd check on you, see how you're doing." "I'm shopping for lettuce," I said. "I think I'm managing." She laughed. Too loud. She took my grocery bags without asking and began loading them into my trunk, narrating each movement like she was filming a demonstration for an audience who needed guidance. "There we go. Don't worry about the lifting. I've got it." I watched her. Not the way you watch someone helping you, the way you watch someone who might be studying you. Every side glance, every softened tone, every time she said something with the subtlety of a brick wrapped in silk. "I know you've been misplacing things," she said. Daniel mentioned it. My grip tightened on the cart handle. "Everyone misplaces things," I said. "Of course. she answered, head tilting sympathetically. But sometimes little signs add up, you know. Little signs. Add up. Words that would echo for weeks. She left after that, her perfume drifting behind her like a trail of expensive lilies. I watched her go, that same heavy feeling returning, deeper this time, like a heartbeat out of rhythm. 2 days later, the mail incident happened. I checked the mailbox at noon. Empty. Again at 2. At 4. At 5. Still empty. At 5:30, I found a neat fanned-out stack of envelopes on my kitchen counter. I stood there staring at them, my pulse slow and steady in my ears. I hadn't brought them in. I hadn't heard a knock. I hadn't unlocked a door. But someone had been here. My house was quiet. Too quiet. I walked room to room, looking for any sign that would explain it away. There wasn't one. The windows were locked. The front door still had both bolts engaged. Nothing was moved, nothing obvious, but the air felt unsettled, as if someone had slipped out the back door seconds before I'd walked in. Paige had a spare key. So did Daniel. I had given it to them willingly, the way mothers do when they believe trust is a simple thing, a harmless thing. That night, I sat at the edge of my bed for a long time, my fingers lightly curled over the bedspread, remembering the way Paige smiled while carrying my groceries. The way she reached for my arm like I needed support. The way she mentioned little signs. The next day, I met Marianne for lunch. "You look tired," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "I've been misplacing things," I said. "A lot of things." She raised an eyebrow. "Or someone's moving them." I laughed softly. "That's dramatic." "Ruth," she said, leaning in, "you are not the dramatic type. If you feel something is wrong, something is wrong." I told her about the keys, the pills, the mail. She didn't even let me finish. "Do you have cameras?" "No." "You need them." "It feels paranoid." "It feels necessary." Her certainty rattled something loose inside me. Marianne wasn't the type to imagine shadows. She was the type to see footprints no one else noticed. 2 days later, Daniel and Paige came over for dinner again. Paige arrived first, casserole in hand, flowers in the other. "Hi, Mom," she said, brushing my cheek with a kiss. "We thought we could talk tonight." Talk. The most dangerous word in a family. They sat on the couch. I sat across from them. Paige pulled out pamphlets I hadn't asked to see. Care facilities, safety assessments, memory evaluations. "I don't need these," I said. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured. "We're just trying to be proactive. Before things get harder." Before. The word chilled me. I looked at Daniel. "Do you think I'm losing my mind?" He hesitated too long. "No, Mom, but Paige notices things. You've been forgetting where your keys are, and—" "She told you that," I said. He blinked. "Well, yeah." Paige reached for my hand. I pulled mine back. "We're doing this for you," she said. I stood. "Excuse me for a moment." I walked into the kitchen, closed the door, and leaned against it until my heartbeat steadied. Something in me shifted then. Not fear, not anger, resolve. If someone was constructing a version of me that wasn't true, I needed to see how they were doing it. I needed to understand the rules of the game before I lost it completely. I pulled open the junk drawer and stared at the small stack of instruction manuals inside. My hand hovered over the drawer's edge. I knew what I needed to do. I didn't tell them. I didn't confront anyone. I simply breathed, slowly, deeply, and made space inside myself for the truth I'd been trying so hard not to see. Someone was trying to erase me. And if I didn't start recording my life, I could lose it. Not piece by piece, but all at once. I didn't buy the camera out of fear. I bought it out of clarity. The morning after that dinner, I drove to the electronics store without telling a soul. The air outside was crisp, the kind of cold that wakes your bones up even if your mind wants to stay wrapped in denial. I walked past rows of televisions and laptops until I found a wall of small, unassuming devices in plastic packaging. Security cameras, baby monitors, doorbells that talk to you. A young man in a red shirt approached. "Looking for something in particular, ma'am?" "Not ma'am. Not today." "Yes," I said. "Something discreet." He showed me several options, explaining features I barely heard. Motion detection, night vision, cloud storage. I nodded politely, but my mind was elsewhere. Each time he used the word security, something inside me tightened. This wasn't about security, it was about proof. About holding on to the truth before someone else rewrote it. I chose a small camera shaped like a cube. It was no bigger than a salt shaker, matte black, the kind of thing you could hide in a bookshelf without anyone noticing. He rang it up. I signed the receipt. The pen shook slightly in my hand. Not from fear, from the weight of knowing I had crossed a line I could never uncross. When I walked out of the store, the sun was bright but cold. I sat in my car for a long moment, the camera box on my lap. I traced the edge of it with my thumb, the way I used to trace Daniel's baby blanket when he slept. I thought about him, how easily he had accepted Paige's version of me, how quickly he had believed I was slipping. It wasn't entirely his fault. Love makes people trust lies if the liar cries the right way. I placed the box in my purse, turned the ignition, and drove home. Installing the camera was surprisingly easy. It fit snugly between two books on the living room shelf, angled toward the coffee table, the sofa, and the hallway leading to the kitchen. I stood back and examined it. You wouldn't see it unless you were looking. And Paige rarely looked at details she didn't think mattered. I connected it to my phone. A small preview screen popped up, showing my living room in real time. It unsettled me, seeing my own house from an angle where I didn't exist. Like I was watching a memory instead of a moment. Marianne called that afternoon. "Did you get it?" she asked without preamble. "Yes." "Good. Check it every night." "I will." I hesitated. "Marianne, what if I'm wrong?" "You're not." "How do you know?" Her voice softened. "Because you're calling me." "Because you don't do that unless something is deeply, undeniably wrong." I closed my eyes. She was right. The first 2 days were uneventful. I went about my routine: tea, toast, listless gardening, reading in my armchair. But every few hours, I checked my phone. The preview always showed an empty room, still and silent, the way a home should look when it's holding its breath. On the third day, something changed. I returned from my morning walk to find the house unusually quiet. The air inside felt disturbed, like someone had walked through it minutes before. I checked the living room. Everything appeared normal, but the atmosphere felt wrong in a way I couldn't name. I sat down, opened the app, and tapped the playback. My heart slowed, paused, then resumed with a hard, rhythmic beat that thudded through my chest. There she was, Paige. The timestamp showed 11:37 a.m., half an hour before I came home. She entered through the front door using her key. She shut it gently, like she didn't want to wake someone. She walked straight to the coffee table. She moved the bowl of keys. She adjusted the remote. She picked up my pill organizer and shook it lightly, listening to the rattle. Then she slipped it into her purse, went into the kitchen, and returned without it. The camera didn't catch where she put it, only that she had moved it. My living room felt smaller as I watched her. Then she sat on the couch, crossed her legs, and smiled. Not at the camera. Not at anything in particular. She just smiled to herself, quietly, like she had accomplished something. She stood, smoothed her skirt, and left through the back door. I watched the screen 3 times before I leaned back in my chair. My fingers trembled, and I laced them together to quiet the shaking. She had been here. She had touched my things. She had moved them. And then she had smiled. Just as the weight of it settled inside me, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Mom, everything okay? Paige told me you seemed a little confused this week." I stared at the message until the words blurred. I didn't respond. The next day, she came again. This time I was ready. I parked a block away, walked home quietly, and slipped into the backyard without making a sound. I stood by the window, hidden by the hedge, watching the faint shape of her move through my house like she belonged in it. I went inside after she left. The pill organizer was gone again. My mail was sorted on the kitchen counter. A photo frame on the shelf had been turned at a slight angle. Subtle, barely noticeable. A test, perhaps. Or a taunt. I checked the camera footage. She wasn't even subtle anymore. She walked around the living room humming. She whispered to herself as she moved my things with calm, practiced hands. "She won't remember putting it here," she said at one point, placing my keys behind the lamp. "It'll be fine. People forget things." A bitterness rose from the back of my throat. At the end of the recording, she paused in front of the bookshelf, close enough that her face filled the frame. She applied lip gloss using the reflection on the glass-covered photo of Daniel and me. She puckered her lips and smiled. Something inside me twisted. A knot of anger I hadn't let myself feel before. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't miscommunication. This wasn't concern. This was construction. She was building a version of me that didn't exist, laying bricks of lies and small manipulations until the world would see the Ruth she wanted them to see. When Daniel called later, I let it ring twice before answering. "Mom," he said, "Paige thinks we should talk about some things. She's been really worried." I shut my eyes. "Daniel," I said, "when was the last time she told you something she didn't frame as concern?" He didn't answer right away. That silence told me more than his words ever had. By the end of that week, I had 47 minutes of footage, enough to show a pattern, enough to understand the scale of what she was doing, but not enough, yet, to stop her. That moment would come later, in a courtroom filled with cameras brighter than mine. But this was the beginning, the moment the truth stepped out from behind the curtain. The moment I understood I wasn't fighting memory loss. I was fighting Paige. I didn't realize how fast a lie grows once someone starts watering it. What began as small rearrangements soon swelled into a quiet campaign, one made of shadows, whispers, and carefully curated concern. Paige hadn't just begun a story about who she wanted me to be. She had already written the first chapters. All she needed now was proof. Or rather, the illusion of it. The next week arrived heavy and gray. Rain threatened the sky, but never fully committed, leaving the air thick with something unfinished. I felt it in my bones, the way animals sense a storm long before it breaks. I tried to live normally. I swept the kitchen. I opened windows for fresh air. I called Marianne, who insisted I go to her place for dinner on Wednesday. I even baked a lemon loaf, though my hand shook slightly while zesting the fruit. But the truth was always there, just out of focus. Every time the house made a sound, wood settling, a distant car door, the soft whir of the refrigerator, I checked the camera app on my phone. Every time I felt a breeze, I wondered if it was the air from the front door closing. Every time my phone buzzed, I wondered if it was Daniel, asking if I was feeling clear today. Paranoia is a poison. It slips into your cup quietly. But in my case, the poison had a name. It wore expensive perfume. And it let itself into my house when I wasn't home. On Thursday, I decided to test a small theory. I placed my keys in the ceramic dish on the table. But this time, I tucked a folded receipt beneath them so slightly that no one would notice without moving the keys. 3 hours later, I returned from my walk and found the dish empty. The receipt sat alone, quietly accusing. I pressed play on the camera footage. Paige entered through the back door this time. A new tactic. She aimed her concern so precisely, it was almost admirable. She took my keys, tucked them behind the cushion on the sofa, then paused mid-step. Her gaze drifted around the room, as if savoring the architecture of her own plan. When she left, she smoothed her hair in the microwave reflection again. It was becoming her signature. I watched the footage with a stillness I didn't recognize. Something inside me had shifted from disbelief to documentation. I wasn't just a woman noticing strange things anymore. I was a woman gathering evidence. That night I slept poorly. Dreams came in pieces. Open doors, missing objects, Paige's perfume lingering in hallways she shouldn't be in. I woke at 4:12 a.m., sat on the edge of my bed, and told myself something I hadn't dared articulate aloud. This is not going to stop on its own. The next morning, Daniel called. "Mom," he said gently, the way people speak to a wounded animal. "Paige said you seemed disoriented yesterday." My jaw clenched. Define disoriented. "She said you weren't sure if you'd taken your pills." "My pills?" I repeated. "The same ones she took out of my house?" There was a pause. "Mom, she wouldn't do that." "She already did," I said softly. "More than once." Daniel exhaled heavily. The sound of a man whose mind wants to be loyal, but whose instincts are conflicted. "Look, she's concerned. That's all." "She's constructing," I corrected. "What?" "Constructing. Building a case." Another silence. Then, "You're being unfair." The irony was sharp enough to cut skin. "I have to go," I said, hanging up before my voice shook. That night, Mary Ann came over with takeout and a bottle of wine. She was one of those friends who didn't need to be told when you were unraveling. She could hear it in the pauses between your words. After dinner, she insisted we put the camera footage on my television so she could see everything clearly. When she saw Paige walk into my home uninvited, she swore loudly enough to make me blush. When she watched her hide my keys, she muttered curses under her breath. But when Paige whispered to herself, quiet little phrases like, "She won't remember," and "This is for her own good," Mary Ann went completely still. After the clip ended, she turned to me. "You need to tell Daniel," she said. "He won't believe me." "Then tell someone who will." I stared at the paused frame on the screen. Paige's face frozen mid-smile, as if she were proud of herself. "I'm not ready yet," Mary Ann exhaled. "You're waiting for something." "I'm waiting for the pattern," I admitted, "for enough evidence to make it undeniable." "You shouldn't have to prove you're sane," she whispered. "But sometimes, when a lie spreads, the truth needs armor." By Sunday, the pattern was undeniable. That afternoon, I left the house to drive to the pharmacy. I checked the camera when I parked in the lot out of habit. The screen lit up, and there she was again. Paige. Entering through the front door this time, as if to show variety, she walked straight to the kitchen, opened the cupboard where I kept my medications, and held up one of the bottles, as if reading the label. Then she opened her purse and slipped the entire bottle inside. She looked pleased, not rushed, not nervous, pleased. A calm satisfaction settled across her features, the kind people get when they believe they've solved a problem. She left through the back door again. I sat in my car for a long moment, the keys in my hand, the air conditioning blowing a cold stream across my skin. People passing by probably thought I was simply resting before going in. An older woman taking a moment. They couldn't see the war unfolding behind my eyes. When I came home, I opened the cupboard. The bottle was gone. The space it used to occupy stared back at me like an empty socket. My phone buzzed. It was Daniel. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. Paige said you sounded confused yesterday. Everything okay?" I didn't respond. I walked into the living room, sat in my armchair, and replayed the footage again. This wasn't confusion on my part. It was invasion on hers. Paige wasn't testing me anymore. She was escalating. Setting the stage. Building evidence. Preparing to present a version of me that didn't exist. For a moment, the weight of it settled in my chest. The cold understanding that someone who should have protected my dignity was instead dismantling it piece by piece. I pressed my hand to my sternum and breathed slowly, deeply. I would not let her erase me. Not in this house. Not in my son's eyes. Not in any courtroom. And that was the moment. Alone in my living room, the footage paused on Paige's satisfied smile when a new truth bloomed inside me. She wasn't just rewriting my life. She was underestimating me. Paige didn't get sloppy. She got confident. There's a difference. Sloppy people leave trails because they're careless. Confident people leave trails because they believe no one will ever follow them. And for weeks, Paige had been walking through my life like she owned the place. Tucking keys under cushions, moving pill bottles, stacking my mail in places I hadn't touched, all while telling my son that I was slipping. She believed she had already built enough credibility to finish the job. That week, she stopped hiding her steps and started staging scenes. The first incident happened on a Thursday morning. I came into the kitchen, still half asleep, craving tea. I opened the cupboard where I always kept my mug. Inside, where my mug should have been, sat a measuring cup. The mug was on top of the refrigerator. On top. I am 5'4". I need a stool to reach the top of the fridge. I hadn't used that stool in months. I stared at the mug for a long moment. My hands stayed cold, even though the kettle hissed hot steam behind me. I checked the camera footage. Paige had entered the house mid-morning the day before. She went straight to the cupboard, removed my mug, placed it on the fridge, and then put the measuring cup in its place. The precision of the switch told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't chance. This wasn't concern. This was architecture. She wanted Daniel to see evidence, not just missing items, wrong items. A woman who could confuse a mug with a measuring cup was a woman on the edge of losing her mind. I watched her leave the kitchen in the footage, humming. I recognized the tune. It was something she played in her car all the time, a catchy pop song about empowerment. Fitting, I suppose, for someone who thought she was taking control. The next afternoon, Daniel came by unannounced. He walked into the kitchen while I was slicing an apple. "Mom," he said, his voice careful, "why is your mug on the fridge?" I looked up at him, at the concern in his eyes that had started to veer into doubt. "Because Paige put it there." He sighed the way people do when they think they're dealing with someone fragile. "Mom," I wiped the knife on a towel. "Daniel, I'm telling you the truth." "Are you sure?" he asked softly. Those 3 words hurt more than everything Paige had done. They were the words of a boy who used to believe in me, now questioning the ground we stood on. I wanted to show him the footage. I wanted to hold my phone up and say, Look at what your wife is doing." But I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I had enough. So I set the knife down gently, took a breath, and said, "I'm sure." He didn't believe me. Not fully, but something flickered behind his eyes. Conflict, confusion, maybe the first crack in Paige's story. It wasn't enough, but it was something. By Saturday, Paige escalated again. I had left the house for a morning walk. When I returned, the front door was locked, the house looked untouched, and the air was still. But when I walked into the bedroom, I froze. My jewelry box was open. Nothing missing, nothing stolen, just open. Like someone had rifled through it and then decided to leave the lid up for effect. A chill crept through my spine as I checked the camera footage. Paige entered again. She didn't touch the jewelry. She didn't steal anything. She simply opened the box, closed the drawer, and walked away. She was building a portrait of a woman who left things open, forgot to close drawers, who might lose something valuable next time and blame the world for it. She was tightening the frame around me. I sat on the edge of the bed and pressed my hands to my temples. The hardest part wasn't the invasion. It was the intent. The quiet, insidious belief that she could mold me into whatever image she needed to justify what she was planning. That afternoon, I visited Marianne. She took one look at me and handed me a glass of water. "What now?" she asked gently. "Everything," I said, my voice thin. "She's doing everything." I told her about the mug, the jewelry box, the drawers, the movements of things that I had never touched. Marianne listened, leaning forward, her jaw tightening with each detail. "You need to see a lawyer," she said. "I'm not ready." "You're waiting for proof?" "Yes." "You already have proof." "Not enough," I whispered. She stared at me for a moment, then nodded. "Then keep going. But don't do it alone." "I'm not," I said. "Not anymore." When I returned home, the house felt different, heavier, darker at the edges. I checked the camera again, not because I needed to. I knew she had come, but because seeing her on the screen kept me grounded in reality. In that evening's footage, Paige didn't move anything. She didn't adjust objects or hide anything. She simply walked around my living room slowly, as if rehearsing. She picked up a framed photo of Daniel and me taken years ago on a beach trip. She stared at it for several seconds, tracing her finger along Daniel's face, then mine, then back again. Her expression was unreadable. She set the photo down. Then she walked to my armchair, sat in it as if testing the fit, leaned back and sighed. She looked satisfied, like she had settled into her role. I watched the clip twice. By the third time, my heartbeat had steadied into something calm and cold. This wasn't a woman trying to help me. This was a woman practicing how to talk about me once she decided I couldn't speak for myself. The next morning, I woke up with a clear head and a sharper sense of purpose. I made tea. I buttered my toast. I opened the crossword. Then I took out a notebook and wrote everything down. Dates, times, what she moved, what she touched, what she said. A record not of forgetfulness, but of intrusion. She was tightening her net. But I was stitching a net of my own, and soon one of us would fall into it. Paige's next move wasn't subtle. It wasn't even clever. It was theatrical, designed for witnesses, for emotional impact, for the kind of dramatic scene that would make anyone watching think, "Oh dear, Ruth really is losing it." I should have expected it. But even with all the footage I'd gathered, all the quiet violations I'd documented, I wasn't prepared for the moment she decided to manufacture a crisis. It happened the following Tuesday. The morning was clear and bright, the kind of crisp, late spring air that makes the whole world feel freshly laundered. I was in the backyard trimming the rosemary bush when I heard a soft metallic sound from the house. I froze. It was the latch on the front door, gentle, practiced, familiar, in a way that sent tension down my spine. I didn't move. I leaned against the fence, garden shears dangling uselessly from my hand, and strained to listen. A moment later, I heard footsteps, quick, light, purposeful. Paige. The confidence in her steps told me she believed I wasn't home. I walked quietly around the side of the house, staying low beneath the kitchen window. At the corner, I paused, taking a slow breath before stepping toward the back door. I didn't want her to see me yet, not until I understood what she was staging. I slipped inside, silently through the garage door, and stood in the doorway to the living room, hidden behind the wall. My heart beat a steady rhythm. My fingers tightened around the garden shears, not because I was afraid, but because adrenaline has a way of clinging to whatever you're holding. Paige entered the kitchen. I could hear her opening cupboards, moving things, the scrape of something across the counter, then the sound of glass clinking. I eased closer, careful not to let the floor creak. When I peeked around the corner, I saw her standing over the sink with one of my drinking glasses shattered at her feet. She held her phone pressed to her ear, her voice high and trembling with the exact pitch of rehearsed panic. "Yes, Daniel, I'm at your mom's," she said, breathless. "I just got here and there's broken glass everywhere. I don't know if she fell or what. I'm so scared. I think something's really wrong. She shouldn't be alone." The fury that hit me didn't come all at once. It bloomed slowly, like a bruise. I stepped fully into the kitchen doorway. "I didn't fall," I said. She spun around, shock flickering over her face before she masked it with concern. "Oh my God," she said, hand over her chest. "You scared me. I thought, well, I found this glass on the floor, and I didn't know where you were. And I got so worried, Ruth. My name on her lips felt like an intrusion." "You shouldn't let your imagination run ahead of you," I said, voice steady. She smiled, small and patronizing. "We're all worried, okay? Daniel's been telling me you've been acting off. And now this? You don't have to hide that you're struggling." "I'm not struggling," I said. "I was outside cutting rosemary." She blinked. "Outside?" "Yes." Her eyes flicked to the window above the sink. She hadn't checked outside before staging her scene. She hadn't even bothered to look. "Well," she said, clearing her throat, "I didn't know that." "No," I said, "you didn't." She stepped closer to me. Too close. Like she wanted to study my expression, look for a crack. "Ruth, we're trying to help you. Don't you understand that?" "I understand a few things," I said softly, "but help isn't one of them." Confusion flashed across her face. Then something else. Calculation. She crouched down and picked up a large shard of glass, holding it delicately between her fingers. "You really could have hurt yourself," she murmured. "I didn't break it." She looked up at me from the floor, her face tilted sweetly, eyes wide. "Are you sure?" There it was, her favorite phrase. "Are you sure?" My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. I didn't need to see Daniel's name on the screen to know he had called because she wanted him to. "You should go, Paige," I said. Her eyebrows lifted. "Go? Why?" "I'm trying to help." "No," I said, stepping forward. "You're not. You're staging scenes. You're moving things. You're entering my house when I'm gone. You're creating problems that don't exist." She froze, deep fear cracking briefly across her expression before she smoothed it away. "That's not true," she whispered. "You're confused." "No," I said again, my voice firm. "I'm paying attention." For a flicker of a moment, she seemed unsure whether to keep performing or to drop the act. Her breathing hitched in her throat. She dropped the glass in her hand, stood quickly, and grabbed her purse. "I don't feel safe here," she said, performing the line with flawless delivery. I almost laughed at the audacity of it. She rushed past me, heading toward the front door with the kind of dramatic exit meant to leave an impression. But I followed her. At the doorway, she turned slightly, eyes shining with false hurt. "I'm going to talk to Daniel," she said. "He needs to know how bad this is getting." "Do," I replied. "I want him to know everything." She hesitated, jaw tightening. Then she left. As soon as the door shut, I pulled out my phone and opened the camera feed. The footage had caught everything, from the moment she entered the kitchen to the staged panic, the fake phone call, the broken glass she scattered on the floor. All of it recorded, all of it time-stamped, all of it undeniable. I replayed the clip twice, breathing slowly, letting the truth settle into place like stepping stones across a river. This was no longer her story, this was mine. And from that moment forward, I wasn't collecting evidence. I was preparing for a reckoning. Paige didn't disappear after the shattered glass performance. If anything, she doubled down. People like her don't retreat when confronted. They pivot, they refine, they escalate. And over the next several days, she began weaving a larger, more strategic web around Daniel. I could feel it tightening, not because I was losing control, but because she was terrified of the moment she realized I was no longer playing the role she wrote for me. The morning after the stage crisis, Daniel showed up at my door with an expression I hadn't seen since he was a teenager, equal parts guilt, confusion, and determination. "Mom," he said, "we need to talk." I stepped aside and let him in. He walked to the kitchen like he always had, muscle memory guiding him, but his movements were tense. His hand brushed the counter, as if reassuring himself the world was still solid under his fingers. He didn't sit down. That alone told me Paige had gotten to him. "Paige is worried," he began. Of course she was. She was always worried when a plan didn't land. "She said yesterday scared her," he continued. "She said she found glass on the floor, and you didn't seem to know how it happened." I leaned against the counter, my arms loose at my sides. "Did she tell you I was in the backyard trimming rosemary?" He blinked. For a second, uncertainty cracked across his expression. "She said you weren't home." "I was. I came in through the garage." He looked down at the floor. "She said you insisted you were outside, but the glass was inside. Because I didn't break it." He exhaled sharply. "Mom, I'm trying to understand. But things keep happening. The keys, the pills, the mail, the mug, and now this." "You're repeating her script," I said quietly. He froze. For a moment, the kitchen went silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. "I'm not repeating anything," he said stiffly. "Yes," I said, stepping closer. "You are, and I need you to think about that." He ran a hand through his hair. An old nervous habit from childhood. A small ache pulsed in my chest at the familiarity of it. "I just don't want anything to be wrong with you," he whispered. I could have softened then. I could have moved toward him, reassured him, soothed the bruise Paige had pressed into his trust. But compassion is a blade. When used too early, it cuts the wrong person. "There is nothing wrong with me," I said, "but something is very wrong with her behavior." Daniel didn't answer at first. His eyes drifted across the kitchen, the cupboards, the sink, the floor, as if searching for evidence of the story he had been fed. When he finally spoke, his voice was small. "I don't know what to believe." That was the first honest thing he'd said in weeks. "You don't have to decide right now," I said quietly. "But you will, eventually." He looked at me for a long moment, something like sorrow passing through him. Then he left without another word. When the door shut behind him, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The house felt larger, emptier, and far too quiet. I turned on the camera feed just to hear the soft hum of the audio, to anchor myself. Paige had escalated, and Daniel was drifting toward the edge of her version of the truth. But I wasn't fading. I was gathering. Late that afternoon, I brewed chamomile tea to steady my nerves and called Marianne. "How bad?" she asked immediately. "He asked if I thought I broke the glass and forgot," Marianne groaned. "He didn't." "He did." "Then it's time," she said. "Lawyer, now?" I hesitated. "I'm not ready." "Ruth," she said, her voice firm, "she's not going to stop. She'll use every slip of yours, every sigh, every moment of tiredness as proof. You need someone in your corner who doesn't get fooled by big eyes and trembling lips." I sipped my tea. The cup shook slightly in my hand. She was right. But part of me needed one more push. Not more evidence. I had plenty. What I needed was the emotional moment that locked my decision into place. It came sooner than I expected. That evening, just as dusk settled in and painted the house in soft blue shadows, there was a knock at my door. Not Paige's soft tap, not Daniel's familiar rhythm. This knock was sharp, professional. When I opened the door, a woman about 30 stood there with a clipboard and a polite, overly neutral smile. "Mrs. Marlowe?" she asked. "I'm with the county's wellness check program. We received a call expressing concern for your well-being." I froze. "Someone reported that you may be struggling with daily tasks," she continued gently. "I'm required to follow up." My lungs tightened. I stepped back enough to let her inside, because refusing would make me look worse. "Who called?" I asked. She gave the careful non-answer that bureaucracy's perfect. "I'm not permitted to disclose that." "Paige." Of course it was Paige. Within minutes, the woman began asking questions in a slow, measured tone that made my skin crawl. "Do you remember what you ate today? Do you manage your medications independently? Any recent falls? Have you found yourself confused in familiar places?" I answered calmly, steadily, giving her none of the fluster Paige hoped for. She looked around the house, checking for signs of instability. Piles of clutter, bills left unpaid, anything that could be labeled concerning. Finding nothing, she tucked her clipboard against her chest. "Everything appears fine, Mrs. Marlowe," she said. "If you ever need support, there are programs available." "I'm fine," I said. She nodded and left. I closed the door and leaned my forehead against it, breathing shallowly. The walls of my home seemed to shift, not physically, but perceptibly, like they were bearing witness to something obscene. Paige had called the county on me. That wasn't concern. That wasn't help. That wasn't even manipulation. That was escalation. That was an attack. She was laying groundwork, preparing official channels, turning rumors into records. I walked to the living room and replayed the camera clip of her earlier that week. Paige slipping medicine bottles into her purse. Paige whispering to herself. Paige rehearsing her concern. The truth stared back at me. I sat down with my notebook, the one where I had documented every movement, every date, every time, and wrote in large, steady letters, "Enough." The next morning, I gathered all the footage, organized it into labeled files, printed my notes, and placed everything into a manila folder. My hands were steady now. Not frightened. Not unsure. Steady. I put on my coat, locked the house behind me, and drove to the law office Marianne had recommended. A small brick building with a white door and neat flower beds, as if justice needed to look welcoming before it opened its jaws. When I stepped inside, the receptionist smiled warmly. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, "but I need to speak to someone today." She nodded. "We'll make time." 10 minutes later, I sat across from an attorney named Sarah. She looked younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, but her eyes were sharp, and she listened with an intensity that made me feel seen in a way Daniel hadn't in weeks. When I finished, she sat back, hands folded. "Mrs. Marlowe," she said quietly, "this is not mild manipulation. This is a coordinated attempt to establish a legal narrative against you." "I know. You have strong evidence," she continued, "very strong. Enough to protect yourself and, when you're ready, enough to put an end to her attempts." I inhaled deeply. "What do I do?" She slid a form across the table. "You let me handle it." That was the moment I felt something inside me settle, anchor, shift into a place of power I hadn't felt since before this nightmare began. Quiet, unshakable power, the kind people underestimate until it's too late. I signed. When I left the office, the air felt different. Clean, brisk, almost hopeful. Paige was building her case, but I had built mine better. The strangest thing about taking back your power is that, at first, nothing around you looks different. The house still creaked in the same places when the temperature changed. The refrigerator still hummed in the middle of the night. The light still came through the living room window in a long, rectangular strip around 9 in the morning. From the outside, my days looked the same. But inside, something had shifted. I had an attorney. I had a manila folder full of neatly labeled evidence. I had dates, times, footage, a written record of every lie Paige had tried to hang on me. For the first time since her concerns began, I wasn't just reacting. I was waiting. Sarah called me 2 days after our first meeting. "I've reviewed everything," she said. "I'm going to request copies of your medical records and make sure your primary care physician is aware of what's being alleged. I want his professional assessment in writing." "In writing?" I repeated. "You think Paige will try something formal?" "I don't think," she said. "I know people like her don't stop. They escalate until someone stops them. And if she never files anything?" Sarah's voice stayed calm. "Then she never files anything. But you'll be prepared if she does. And Mrs. Marlowe, don't warn her." I wasn't planning to. Good. After I hung up, I sat in my armchair and watched dust motes drift through the sunlight like lazy snow. I wasn't used to having someone fight for me. I had spent my life being the one who fixed things, students, lessons, other people's arguments. It felt strange and oddly tender to let someone else pick up the sword. 3 days later, I got the first sign Paige sensed something was wrong. She stopped coming by unannounced. It was subtle. No more surprise visits, no more just in the area appearances. Instead, she started calling ahead, not to ask if she could come over, but to ask how I was. "Just checking in," she'd say. "How are you feeling today, Ruth? Any confusion? Any trouble with the stove? Or with the mail? Or with your car?" Her list of questions was practically an outline of her own wrongdoing. "I'm fine," I answered each time, voice even. "I'm doing well." "Really?" she'd say, the words stretching out like a rubber band. "Because Daniel said you sounded a little off." I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just let the silence sit until she filled it with another attempt. She wasn't used to silence from me. She was used to reaction. Daniel came over the following Sunday. It used to be that Paige came too, all smiles and casseroles and thinly veiled assessments. This time, she sent him alone. He sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee, watching me move around the room with wary eyes. "You seem good," he said finally. "I am good," I replied. "You're not forgetting anything? Feeling confused?" I wanted to laugh. "Only about why everyone expects me to be falling apart," I said. He stared at the coffee in his hands. "The wellness check? I didn't know she was going to do that," he said. "I found out after." So he did know. That was something. "And you're okay?" he asked. "With them coming?" "No," but I said, "I handled it." There was a long pause. He looked up at me, searching my face for something. I let him see what was actually there. Tiredness, yes, but steadiness too. Not the fragile woman Paige had described to him in careful, tragic tones. "Mom," he said quietly, "what if you did need help? Would you tell me?" "If I needed help," I said, "I would get it. The problem is, your wife is trying to convince you I'm drowning while she's sneaking buckets of water onto the floor." His lips parted slightly. He didn't argue immediately. That alone was a shift. "You're saying she's making it look worse," he said. "I'm saying she's making things happen and then blaming me for them." He flinched just a little. His fingers tightened on the mug's handle. "I don't know what to think," he whispered. "You will," I said softly. "Sooner than you realize." He left not long after, claiming he had errands to run. I watched him walk down the path to the car, shoulders tense. Guilt looks heavy on a grown man, especially one who suspects that the person he married might be capable of the things his mother is describing. That evening, Sarah called again. "I spoke with your doctor," she said. "He's willing to write a statement, confirming that you have no diagnosed cognitive impairment, that your memory and judgment are appropriate for your age, and that he has no concerns about your ability to live independently. A knot in my chest loosened. He believes me. He believes his tests, she said, and his experience with you will get it notarized. The next day, Sarah filed a notice with the court officially retaining herself as my legal representative, in anticipation of any petition affecting my autonomy. The language sounded clinical, but when she explained it, I understood the weight of it. If she files for guardianship or conservatorship, Sarah said, the court will already have documentation on record. We're not waiting until we're on the back foot. We're staking your claim now. I pictured Paige's face if she ever learned that while she was laying her quiet breadcrumbs, I had been building a wall she couldn't see. 4 days passed with no surprise visits, no moved objects, no rearranged pills. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. It was almost enough to make me think she had given up. Almost. On the 5th day, the phone rang in the middle of the afternoon. I was in the garden, dirt under my fingernails, the familiar ache of age in my knees. I answered on the 3rd ring, careful not to sound rushed. Hello? Mom? Daniel's voice, thinner than usual. We need to talk. Paige filed something. With the court. Of course she had. What did she file? I asked. He hesitated. A petition. For, temporary guardianship. Just over financial and medical decisions. For now. For now. Cowardly words. Meant to soften the blow. She said, it's just to keep you safe until we figure things out, he added. Did she? I murmured. I don't know if this is the right thing, he said quickly, words tumbling over each other. But she's really scared, Mom. She thinks you're in danger. She thinks you're in denial. She thinks... I know what she thinks. I cut in gently. Did she think to tell you that I have a lawyer? Silence on the line. You have a lawyer? He repeated. Yes. How long? Long enough. He didn't speak for several seconds. I could almost hear his mind cracking in new directions, recalibrating the story he'd been given. He started, then broke off. Why didn't you tell me? You weren't ready to hear it, I said simply. My words landed like a stone in water. I could feel the ripple through the line. I shouldn't be talking about this, he said abruptly. She doesn't know I called. Of course she didn't. She would have wanted to control the moment I found out. Thank you for telling me, I said. Sarah will receive a notice from the court. Will respond. Sarah? My attorney. Oh. He sounded like a man who had just realized his opponent had been playing chess while he'd been holding checkers. After we hung up, I called Sarah and told her what Daniel had said. Good, she replied calmly. I've been expecting it. You have? She's been laying the groundwork, Sarah said. Medical concerns, wellness checks, emotional narratives. People like that think they're the only ones who understand strategy. What happens now? I asked. Now, she said. We let her put everything in writing. We let her make her case under oath. And then we answer with the footage. Her certainty was a balm. So much of this ordeal had felt like I was shouting into a storm. To have someone on my side who wasn't just listening but preparing made the storm feel less like a threat and more like weather I could endure. A week later, I received the official notice in the mail. Thick envelope. County seal. My name printed neatly on the front. Ruth Marlowe, respondent. I sat at the kitchen table and opened it with a butter knife. The words were dense, but the meaning was simple. Paige was asking the court to declare me incapable of managing my own life. I read her petition carefully. She claimed I was forgetful, that I frequently repeated stories, that I had left the stove on multiple times. She mentioned, quote, documented concerns, and, quote, a wellness check initiated out of necessity. She used phrases like progressive decline and emerging pattern. She sounded so reasonable on paper, so composed, so heartbreakingly concerned. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed her. I slid the documents back into the envelope and placed it neatly beside the manila folder with my records. Then I brewed a pot of tea. When I took my first sip, it occurred to me that Paige had finally given me something I needed. A stage. She thought she had chosen the battlefield. She thought she had the advantage. But in a courtroom, truth doesn't care about trembling voices and well-placed tears. Truth cares about proof. And proof was exactly what I had. The court date circled my life like a distant storm. Low at first, then louder, then unavoidable. Every day closer felt like another degree of pressure added to the air. Nothing crushing, but constant, squeezing, reminding, preparing. Paige, meanwhile, grew bold. Bold, in the way a woman does when she believes she can control the ending. She started sending texts instead of calling. Long, syrupy messages full of gentle concern and razor edges. Just checking in on you. You didn't sound like yourself earlier. Daniel and I talked. We think you'll feel so much better once the court helps take some pressure off your shoulders. I know this is scary, Ruth, but losing independence is a natural part of aging. Aging. That was her favorite lever. I didn't respond. Not out of fear, out of strategy. Silence is disarming. People like Paige expect pushback. They study it. They counter it. But silence? Silence leaves them off balance. It forces them to script their own paranoia. Daniel came over twice that week. Once alone. Once with her. The visit with Paige was a performance. She walked into my house like a fragile saint. Hands clasped. Shoulders slumped, voice soft with manufactured empathy. She sat on my couch, smoothing her skirt like she wanted to appear small, gentle, harmless. I just want what's best for you, she whispered, eyes shining with the threat of tears. I hate that you're angry with me. I'm only trying to help. Help! That word had become a knife. I'm not angry, I said calmly. She blinked quickly, thrown. You're not? No. Oh, she breathed, relieved. Good, because once the court intervenes, we'll all feel more at ease. Intervenes. Ease. Sweet little words coating poison. I simply nodded. Daniel watched me closely, like a man who couldn't decide whether he was witnessing grace or madness. I didn't give him anything. No hint of the truth. No fury. No justification. Just calm. Quiet can be terrifying when someone expects chaos. When they left, Paige hugged me. Her body was stiff, cold, brittle as dry ice. She whispered against my ear, I hope you don't try to fight this. You'll only embarrass yourself. She pulled back, smiling the way a person smiles after slipping a needle into your arm. I closed the door gently behind them. Not angry, not shaken, just ready. Sarah called that night. We received the court packet, she said. I've reviewed Paige's statements. And? She exhaled a laugh, short, disbelieving, edged with something like admiration. She's confident. I'll give her that. She paints herself as your savior. Lists dozens of incidents with precise emotional details, but very little actual evidence. She thinks she doesn't need evidence, I said. Yes, Sarah agreed. She thinks sentiment will win. The trembling voice, the compassionate smile, the I didn't want to do this, but I had to performance. Will it work? In a courtroom? No, she said. Not with what you have. I sat back in my armchair, feeling the truth of that settle into my bones. What happens at the hearing? I asked. Paige presents her case, she said. Then we present ours. And the video? It will be shown, Sarah said evenly. Every second of it. I imagine Paige's face. Not frightened, not yet. but tight with confusion as the judge presses play. I imagine the air in the courtroom turning thick, the people shifting in their seats, Daniel's mouth falling open. I imagine the stillness right before the fall, because every fall begins with a breath. Sarah continued, "Your job is to be calm, steady, clear. The judge will be looking at your demeanor as much as the evidence. Quiet resilience. The very thing Paige had mistaken for fragility." "I can do that," I said. "I know you can." We hung up. I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the house breathe around me. My living room, captured in hours of footage, felt different now, almost sacred. My chair, my shelves, my coffee table. Mine. Every piece of that room had watched Paige lie with her hands, with her movements, with the subtle rearranging of objects she thought I would forget. She had turned my home into a stage. She hadn't realized I'd been recording the play. 3 days before the hearing, Daniel visited again, without Paige this time. His eyes were tired, ringed with the kind of worry that goes beyond sleep deprivation, the kind born from internal conflict. "Mom," he said, sitting at the table across from me, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you scared?" It was the most honest question he'd asked in months. "Yes," I said, "but not of what she thinks." He looked down. "I don't know how to choose." "You don't have to choose," I said. "The truth will choose for you." He looked up at me then, something breaking behind his eyes. "I want to believe you." "You will," I said quietly. "Soon." He wiped his face with both hands, ashamed. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I feel like I failed you." "You're blinded by love," I said. "It happens." He nodded, but his shame didn't ease. When he left, I walked him to the door. He hugged me, a long, desperate embrace. He smelled like cedar and rain. My little boy was still in there somewhere, hidden beneath all the fear Paige had poured into him. For the first time in weeks, I let myself hope. The night before the hearing, I watched the footage again. Not all of it. I didn't need to. But I watched enough to remind myself of every step she took inside my house. The calm cruelty of her movements. The rehearsed tenderness. The deliberate chaos. She truly believed she could rewrite me. But the camera caught the truth. And tomorrow, the world would see it. As I closed the app, something inside me settled. Slow, deep, inevitable. Tomorrow wasn't just a hearing. It was a reckoning. Not the quiet kind. Not the subtle kind. The kind that cracks open a life and spills everything inside into the light. The kind a woman like Paige Lawson could never walk away from unscathed. In the morning, I would walk into that courtroom, steady, prepared, and unafraid. And Paige? She would walk in believing she'd already won. And she would be wrong. I knew the minute I walked into the courthouse that Paige believed the day belonged to her. She stood in the hallway with Daniel at her side, wearing a soft blue blouse and a delicate gold necklace meant to catch the light whenever she pretended to tremble. She had chosen her appearance carefully, compassion woven into every thread. She held a folder against her chest like a shield, and she was speaking to Daniel in the low, urgent tone she used when she wanted him pliable. When she saw me, she smiled. A slow, pitying smile. "Ruth," she said gently, "I'm glad you came. I know this is hard." "Hard? Not for me." Daniel tried to smile too, but his eyes darted away quickly. He couldn't meet my gaze, not with everything he suspected and everything he feared he'd see. Sarah, beside me, touched my elbow lightly. "Don't respond," she whispered. "Stay calm. It helps us." Calm was easy. I had been calm for weeks. Inside the courtroom, we all took our places. Paige and Daniel sat at the petitioner's table. I sat beside Sarah at the respondent's table. The judge entered, a tall man with a stern, tired face. the kind of face that could sift truth from theatrics without effort. Paige stood when called. She spoke with the voice she had practiced in my living room all those weeks ago, soft, trembling, painfully sincere. "Your Honor," she began, "this has been so difficult for our family. I love Ruth like she's my own mother. But I've watched her decline. I've been the one finding broken glass, misplaced medications, forgotten stoves, and moments of confusion she doesn't remember afterward." She paused, swallowing dramatically. "I didn't want to file this petition," she whispered, "but I can't watch her struggle alone anymore." Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside her. The judge nodded, expression unreadable. "Thank you. Miss Lawson, can you provide specific examples?" And then she did. One by one, she detailed every incident she had staged. The keys, the pills, the mail, the mug, the glass on the floor. She spoke with such confident sorrow that even I, knowing the truth, felt the power of her performance. She lowered her voice in all the right places, touched Daniel's arm with trembling fingers, let her breath catch when she spoke about the danger of denial. It was a masterful performance, almost admirable, in a sick way. When she finished, she sat down slowly, letting her shoulders sag, as though the burden of caring had worn her thin. The judge turned to Sarah. "Your response?" Sarah rose, calm and controlled. "Your Honor, we have evidence demonstrating that Ms. Lawson's claims are not only false but deliberately manufactured." Paige's head snapped up. "What?" she whispered. Sarah continued, her voice steady. "The respondent, Mrs. Marlowe, began noticing unusual disturbances in her home several weeks ago. In response, she installed a security camera in her living room. What it captured directly contradicts the petitioner's statements." Paige's face went still, then pale, then brittle. "Your Honor," Sarah said, "with the court's permission, I will play the footage." The judge nodded. "Proceed." The bailiff dimmed the courtroom lights. The screen flickered to life, and Paige's downfall began. The first clip showed her entering my home uninvited, quietly locking the door behind her, walking into the living room with a calm, practiced air. A murmur rippled through the room. She paused on the screen, adjusting her hair in the reflection of a picture frame. Paige's breath hitched audibly. The clip continued. She moved my keys. She placed them behind the lamp. She nudged the remote. She opened my pill organizer, shook the pills, slipped them into her purse, and replaced them with different ones. When her voice appeared, soft, almost cheerful, whispering, "She'll never remember," I heard Daniel inhale sharply beside her. The judge leaned forward. The murmurs grew. Someone gasped. Paige's face was draining of color, inch by inch. The next clip showed her opening my mail and placing it on the kitchen counter, then the mug on top of the fridge, then sitting on my armchair like she owned the place. Another clip, another lie unraveling. And then the final piece, the staged broken glass scene. There she was, entering my kitchen, taking a glass out of the cabinet, holding it loosely, letting it slip and shatter on the floor, pulling out her phone, practicing her breathing. "Daniel," she said on the recording, her voice trembling perfectly, "I'm at your mom's, and there's glass everywhere. I don't know what's happening." She's confused. In the courtroom, Daniel whispered, "Oh my God." But Paige made a sound I will never forget. A small, trapped inhale, like a woman drowning in inches of water. "Stop it," she whispered hoarsely. "Turn it off." The judge didn't move. On screen, Paige crouched to the floor, picking up a shard of glass, staring at it like it was a prop she needed to memorize. Courtroom Paige gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles went bone white. When the video ended, the lights came up slowly. Silence. Thick as smoke. The judge folded his hands. "Miss Lawson," he said, voice even, "do you have any explanation?" She opened her mouth. No words came. Her lips trembled. Her eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal, looking for a door that didn't exist. Her chest rose and fell too quickly. Finally, she choked out, "That's not. I didn't. This is manipulated." Sarah lifted her eyebrow. "Your Honor, we are prepared to provide chain of custody verification and device logs." "No," Paige cried, standing abruptly. "You don't understand. She's lying. She tricked the camera. She set me up." Daniel flinched away from her touch. "Paige," he said, voice cracking, "stop." She tried to grab his arm. "Daniel," she sobbed, "you know me. You know I would never. This isn't real. This isn't what it looks like." He pulled his arm back. Hard. "Then explain it," he said, voice raw. "Explain why you're in Mom's house. Explain the pills. Explain the glasses. Explain all of it." Paige stared at him, mouth open, gasping for breath she couldn't catch. Her eyes were wild, trapped, cornered. The judge slammed his gavel once. "Order in the court." Paige trembled violently, her whole body quivering with the sudden, crushing weight of consequences. She swayed on her feet, reaching again for Daniel. He stepped backwards. That was the moment she broke, visibly, publicly, catastrophically. Her voice came out shrill, unrecognizable. "I did it for US!" she screamed. "I did it because she won't let go!" Gasps echoed through the courtroom. She realized what she'd said a second too late. The horror flickered across her face. Raw, exposed, undeniable. Ruthless truth has a sound. It's the sound a lie makes when it cracks open. The judge's voice cut through the room. "Ms. Lawson, you have just admitted." "No!" she shrieked again, clutching her head with both hands. "No, no, no! This isn't! It wasn't supposed to!" She stumbled backward, knocking over her chair. Paper scattered around her feet like the bones of her broken plan. Daniel covered his face with both hands. She began sobbing, deep, heaving sobs that shook her entire frame. She collapsed to her knees, hands pressed over her mouth. Security moved toward her. The judge issued his ruling simply, clearly, powerfully. Petition denied. With prejudice. "And Ms. Lawson, this court is recommending a full investigation into your actions." Paige let out a hollow, guttural sound, half scream, half sob. The kind of sound that marks the exact moment a person realizes they have lost everything. But I didn't gloat. I didn't move. I didn't even speak. I watched her fall apart in the wreckage she had built for me, and I felt nothing but the steady, quiet relief of truth finally taking shape. After a long minute, she was escorted out, still gasping, still shaking, still trying to form words she no longer had the power to shape. Daniel stayed behind. He didn't sit. He didn't cry. He simply walked toward me, slowly, like a man crossing a field filled with the aftermath of a storm. "Mom," he whispered, voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." He wasn't talking about the court. He was talking about everything. I put my hand over his. "We move forward," I said softly. "One truth at a time." And behind him, through the glass doors of the courtroom, I watched Paige Lawson disappear down the hallway. Small, shaking, and stripped of the lies she had wrapped herself in like silk. Her story had ended. And mine, finally, was free to begin again. I didn't feel triumphant when the courtroom doors shut behind us. Relief, yes. Release, absolutely. But victory? Victory is loud, and what I felt was quiet. Soft, steady, like stepping out of a long, dark tunnel into air that finally smelled like my own life again. After everything, the world didn't explode into celebration. It simply continued, and I had to learn how to step back into it. Daniel followed me outside, though he kept a few steps behind, as if he wasn't sure he deserved to walk beside me. Maybe he wasn't. Not yet. "Mom," he said softly. Can we talk? Not now, not today, but sometime soon. Please? I turned toward him. He looked older than he had a month ago, tired, hollow around the eyes, the way guilt wears on a person who knows they chose the wrong side, even when they didn't mean to. We will, I said, but you need to breathe first. He nodded. He understood. I wasn't shutting him out. I just wasn't going to be his bandage right now. Some wounds you must feel before you ask forgiveness for them. He opened his mouth to say more, but stopped. Then he stepped forward and hugged me. It wasn't the desperate, breaking hug he'd given me weeks earlier. It was smaller, gentler, the kind of hug a boy gives his mother when he realizes she doesn't need rescuing, and never did. Thank you, he whispered, for not giving up on me. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. He stepped away, wiping his eyes quickly, embarrassed. I'll call you tomorrow, he said. I believed him. When he left, I sat on a bench outside the courthouse. The breeze lifted strands of my hair, and I closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I wasn't listening for footsteps inside my house. I wasn't scanning the room for things out of place. I wasn't wondering what invention Paige would create next. Silence felt like medicine. Sarah sat beside me, legs crossed neatly, her folder resting in her lap. You handled yourself perfectly. I didn't do much. You did more than you think. Staying composed in the midst of a smear campaign is one of the hardest things a person can do. I considered that. Will there be consequences? For her? There will be an investigation, she said. And there will be warnings, reports, possibly charges if the DA decides to take it further. But legal consequences aren't the only kind. What do you mean? She looked at me carefully. You saw Daniel's face. You saw how fast her mask fell. Sometimes losing the narrative is the deepest fall a person like that can experience. I nodded slowly. That felt true. A week passed before I saw Daniel again. He came over on a rainy afternoon, dripping wet, his hair plastered to his forehead. He looked like a man who had spent days thinking about the right way to step back into someone's life. Come in, I said, handing him a towel. We sat at the kitchen table, tea between us. He spoke first. I'm sorry, he said simply. I should have listened. I should have questioned things sooner. I was so caught up in wanting to believe she cared about you, and maybe wanting her to care about me the same way. He swallowed. I was wrong, Mom. Guilt thickened his voice, but it didn't feel manipulative. It felt human. I know, I said. And now you know, too. He nodded, shoulders sagging. I don't know what's going to happen with us, he said quietly. Me and Paige, I don't know if we can come back from this. You have to figure that out on your own, I replied. And whatever you choose, it's yours to choose. Not mine. He reached across the table, hesitated, then took my hand. I'm glad you're okay, he whispered. I don't know what I would have done if I'd lost you. You didn't lose me, I said. You just lost sight of me for a little while. We spent the afternoon talking, not about the petition or the lies or the camera footage, but about real things, ordinary things. We laughed once or twice. That felt like a miracle. When he left, he hugged me again. A real hug this time. Warm, steady, full of something like renewal. I closed the door gently behind him. Paige never contacted me again. I heard, through neighbors and soft-spoken whispers, that she tried for weeks to rebuild her story, that she cried to friends, claiming she had been misunderstood, that she blamed stress, burnout, her job, that she tried to convince Daniel she had only ever wanted to help. But truth has a weight to it. Once it lands, it's hard to lift a lie back into place. Eventually, I heard she moved out of their apartment for a while, then back in, then out again. I didn't ask Daniel for details. They were his to hold, not mine. Some nights, though, As I sat in my favorite chair reading, a thought would drift through me, quiet, unhurried. Paige had underestimated me. She'd mistaken age for weakness, kindness for confusion, silence for surrender. But age isn't fragility. Kindness isn't blindness. Silence isn't defeat. And resilience. Resilience is a quiet thing, yes. But quiet does not mean small. Weeks later, when I finally took down the camera from my shelf, I held it in my hands and felt the strange bitterness of gratitude. It had captured the truth, but more than that, it had captured the moment I remembered who I was. I put it in a drawer, not out of fear, but because I no longer needed it. I knew what to trust again. I knew who I was again. And, looking back, I see the truth clearly. Paige didn't lose because I fought harder. She lost because she had built her entire plan on the belief that I was already gone. But I wasn't gone. I was watching, I was waiting. And when the moment came, I stood, steady, clear, unshakable. In that moment, I understood something I wish more people knew. Sometimes the loudest strength is the quietest presence. And sometimes the most dramatic justice comes not from raising your voice, but simply from letting the truth speak. I didn't expect peace to feel so soft. For months, I had lived with tension woven into the walls of my home. Silent, invisible threads pulled tight by someone else's hands. When the ordeal ended, when the echoes of the courtroom faded into memory, I kept waiting for the old fear to return. The checking, the scanning, the listening for things that shouldn't be moving. But peace stayed, quiet, steady, loyal, like an old friend who had been waiting for me to come back to myself. I planted flowers that spring, bright marigolds, purple sage, tomatoes that grew taller than I expected. The garden became a kind of meditation, a reminder that growth doesn't happen all at once. It comes piece by piece, leaf by leaf, in its own time. One morning, as I was kneeling in the dirt with the sun warming my shoulders, I felt someone standing behind me. I didn't turn immediately. The air didn't change in that unsettled way it used to when Paige slipped into my house. This presence was familiar, softer. "Mom?" Daniel's voice. I stood slowly, brushing soil from my knees. He held 2 cups of coffee, one for me, one for him. "Thought maybe I could help with the garden," he said. I nodded. "I'd like that." We worked together in a comfortable silence. No heavy apologies, no confessions, no revisiting the shadows of what had happened. Just 2 people, hands in the earth, finding a new rhythm after a long fracture. After a while, he said quietly, "I talked to Paige. I didn't look up." "And we're not together," he said. "Not now, maybe not ever. I don't know, but I see things clearly now. And I'm sorry it took so long." He didn't need to say more. There are apologies that land loud and messy, and there are apologies that settle gently into place like seeds in the soil. His was the second kind. We finished planting the row of tomatoes. Before leaving, he kissed my forehead and said, "You're stronger than you think." But the truth was simple. I always had been. I just needed the world to fall apart a little to remember. That night, as the sun dipped low and painted the living room in gentle gold, I walked to my bookshelf. The camera that once sat there was gone. I hadn't needed it for weeks. Instead, I placed a small ceramic dish on the shelf, a gift from Marianne. Its inscription read, "You saw what they didn't." I liked the quiet truth of that. Before bed, I walked through the house, hallway, kitchen, living room, not checking, just moving. The air felt still, honest, mine. And for the first time since this began, I thought back to the courtroom, to the moment Paige leaned toward me, confident and cruel, and whispered her threat, to her smile when she believed she held all the cards. to her voice cracking when the truth finally surfaced, to the sound of her knees hitting the floor when the lies collapsed under their own weight. The same door she once used to enter my home uninvited closed behind her that day as she was escorted out of the courtroom. That was the beginning of my peace. Looking back now, I see that the real victory wasn't the gavel striking or the petition being denied. It wasn't even the footage or the unraveling of her plan. The real victory was the quiet moment afterward, when I walked out into the sunlight with nothing left to hide, nothing left to prove, and nothing left to fear. What I learned from it all was simple. Silence is not weakness. Age is not fragility. And truth, quiet, steady truth, is the most powerful witness of all. If you've ever had your world shaken by someone you trusted, if you've ever had to fight quietly for your own voice, if you've ever stood in the storm waiting for the calm, know that you're not alone. And if this story resonated with you, I'd love for you to join the conversation. Leave a comment below, share your thoughts, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.